Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz. First, reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, connecting high school and college students to Israel, and helping our brothers and sisters in need following the heinous October 7th terrorist attack. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Plus, if you haven't done so already, we'd love it if you subscribed, rated, and reviewed us, 5 stars, of course. Do so wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd love it too if you shared the show within your orbit. And in just a sec, I'll be telling you why you need to be in Dallas, Texas from November 14th to the 17th, 2024, of course. So listen out for that. Get something handy to write with because you're going to want to jot this down. But first, our featured guest on this episode is Shahar Azani, veteran Israeli diplomat and passionate advocate for Israel who returns for the third time to IsraelCast. He's a frequent contributor on various media outlets focusing on Israel, Jewish issues in the Middle East. He serves as founder and principal at Fourth Dimension Strategies and head of corporate social responsibility at Jet Support Services, Inc. Shahar was formerly senior vice president at JBS, that's Jewish Broadcasting Service, former executive director for StandWithUs in New York, and served at Israel's foreign ministry for 16 years in London, Los Angeles, Jerusalem, New York, and Nairobi. Yes, indeed, he's a globetrotter. And in all of those positions, he focused on international affairs, media affairs, and public diplomacy. And before all of that, he practiced law at Chaim Zadok and Company, based in Tel Aviv, focusing on litigation. And with that, Shahar joins us now on the line via Zoom from his New York City home. Shahar, it is always a pleasure to see you, and welcome back to IsraelCast.
You know, who can say no to you, Stephen, especially to a fellow globetrotter like you?
All right. Well, listen, thanks so much for that. And we're glad that you're in New York City and you carved out the time to join us here on the program because we know that you have a crazy, crazy busy schedule. And speaking of which, and speaking of travel, you know, you've spoken to a wide swath of groups throughout the United States. And what I'd love you to share with our listeners first is which groups and what have you heard and what have you learned from them through all of these engagements that you've been on really since October 7th?
You know, Stephen, when we think about the reality post-October 7th, just the other day I was looking at, some pictures from the past. And when I say past, I mean pre-October 7th, and then present would be post-October 7th. And truth be said, it feels like it's an age of innocence almost. I looked at myself and I look at myself as a different person. And I think one of my major senses since October 7th is that sense of together. It's our need to come together as a community, pro-Israel, Israelis, Jews, our need to stand by one another, to hold on to each other. And that has been a very significant element of my travels in the course of the year, in which I've been able to, meet with students and community leaders, with pastors, Christian organizations, churches, Jewish communities across the board, engaging with the media. And I gotta say, I always admit it firsthand, and I'm very open about this. When I interact on that level, it's always kind of like a therapy session. It's important for me to be there, to share my heart and to listen to other people. I remember in one of those instances, I was on a plane traveling to the West Coast, and it was right around Pesach, Passover. And I spoke with somebody over the phone and said, Chag Sameach, happy Passover. And a girl sitting in front of me turns back, Stephen, and she says, "Oh, you're Jewish." I said, "Yes, I am." And she looks at me and says, "Chag Sameach." And I could sense there was a relief, there was a sense of we're all in this together. And it was a very touching moment, but very reflective of the experiences that I've had across this year, of the importance, because what we've seen on October 7th, and I really feel like we haven't even begun the process of digesting it, of really pausing for a minute and understanding what it means to lose thousands of people in one day in an event whose magnitude can only be described as sheer biblical. And it's going to take us a long time to process it. So going through this year and trying to absorb that shock with so many of my brothers and sisters, and when I say brothers and sisters, I mean fellow human beings who desire peace and justice, and they could be Jews and non-Jews alike in that sense, because I've seen shock and horror across the board. It's been a very unique experience that I wish we didn't have to go through, but it's been very telling and very meaningful for me.
I really like what you said, Shahar, about it being a unifying experience, because when I see people on the streets here of New York wearing their dog tags, for example, and I don't know who these people are, but yet I feel a sense of closeness with them in the message that they want to exude. So I'm totally with you on that. There is this sense of unity, this underlying sense of it, really, which is quite beautiful. And when
Or a
you're
Star of David, right?
or a
Or a
Star of David, or a
Star of David
kippah,
of
or
anything, yeah,
yeah,
or
or
that
a
color.
chai, absolutely, or even a bring them home T-shirt, which
Right,
I have
right.
exactly. And sometimes you make eye contact with these people, and it's
I
this hidden message
I am
that exists.
notorious. You can ask my kids. I'm notorious for eye contacts.
I am too. It gets us into trouble sometimes, though. Anyway, that's another story. What do you tell people, though? What do you tell these groups? Is there a common message that you're sharing with them?
Yes, there absolutely is, Stephen. First of all, the most important message I have for them is I'm Hineni. I'm here, you're here, we are all in here for a reason. So we are in this together. And there is that profound sense of, it's a familial sense. We're almost, one family. We know, right, Stephen? When
Mhm.
when you look at somebody with that dog chain, with that necklace, we know, I know, you know, we know. We know where we are, we know who we are. I also try to convey the message that this is, and to many people it's very clear, that this has been a very unique era in the sense that this is a masks off kind of era. So on October 7th, you've seen the massacre of Jews for being Jews, the kidnapping, the maiming, the torture, the rape, the decimation. It's been horrendous. But now, as a veteran in the field of Israel's public diplomacy and what people tend to call Hasbara, we're used to hearing the pro-Israel and anti-Israel arguments, and those arguments used to be shrouded in, apartheid, discussions of settlements, of politics, of Jerusalem. And what we've seen post October 7th is a time when there is no need for those masks anymore. Those who chant on the streets against Israel no longer talk about, peace or two-state or reconciliation or settlements or Jerusalem or sticking points in the negotiations. They call right out for the annihilation of the Jewish state of Israel. They want not 67, but 48. They want from the river to the sea. And you know what, Stephen? They're not shy about this. There no longer are these like hidden calls or the discussions about anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism. The calls are very much out in the open. So I see my mission as, and I always have that sense, Stephen, like I'm telling people the obvious. But when I move around like that bee from one flower to the next, I feel it's incumbent upon myself to share with people those images that I see. What is it that we see clearly, and what does that mean? So I want to ask myself, what does that mean? So first of all, here is what we're seeing. So let's acknowledge reality. Let's look it in the eye, because I feel that for too many years, this has been one of the main problems that Israel faced as well. We refuse to look reality in the eye. We refuse to acknowledge what Hamas is. We refuse to believe them even when they told us who they were. So, as a Jewish community, as Jews living in the diaspora, living in our environment, in our surrounding, we must be able to look reality in the eye and acknowledge it, but not just acknowledge it in a passive way, but also engage with it, roll up our sleeves, make a difference. In many of the JNF community gatherings that I've attended, the focus was very much action oriented. How can you take part in a mission to Israel and make a difference on the ground? Really engage with reality head on, with this very unique reality that Israel and Israelis are experiencing at the moment. What can you do to galvanize support for Israel and the Jewish people on college campuses and beyond through Caravan for Democracy? How can you contribute to what I love calling planting trees, but not just in the earth, but also in the hearts and minds of people? The trees of love, the trees of justice, the trees of peace, because that's key to be able to move forward. And I have found people to be really taken by that message. I've always been amazed to see how what I view as the obvious is not really that obvious to everyone. And it's been a very optimistic and experience for me in spite of the difficult circumstances.
Shahar, I want to go back to something that you said, that the chants that we're hearing on the streets aren't for a two-state solution. They're for pre-1948 solution, is a one state from the river to the sea. Two things. Number one is polling indicates most Americans really support the state of Israel. So we're talking about a very vocal group of people, a horrible group of people, dare I say, but they're
Yep.
very vocal and they have a great impact. And the scary thing is that how does that impact work then? And how does that transcend into future generations? So that's the scary thing that I want you to address, number one. And related to that, is the genie out of the bottle? And how do we put the genie back in the bottle if possible?
You know, it's a great point, Stephen. I mean, the fact is that we are dealing with a vocal minority. Now, this is definitely not the majority of Americans. It's not the majority of Americans that I have met.
And
I have
I want
seen,
to interrupt you there for a second, because they are vocal and the media is giving them a tremendous amount of
of
attention.
course, because
Yeah.
that's the circus, that's the spectacle, right? You got those
If it
truly.
bleeds, it leads, as I say.
Yeah, exactly. And literally, that's what they do. When
Yeah.
you deface American monuments, when you trash public property, when you deface American values, it becomes a headline. And I got to tell you something. I do not object to that. I actually think that what they're doing now is they're showing us who they are. They're
Yeah.
telling us who they are. And that's an important wake up call, because all of the people who look at this and tell themselves this is a political discussion, political debate, maybe in the past it was a bit more comfortable to lie to yourself and tell yourself that it's not about anti-Semitism, it's not about the desire to destroy and kill and destruct. It's all about a political discussion that can be reasoned with, that can be negotiated with. And here you go. You live in a reality where a professor on a college campus would be invigorated at Cornell at the site of this horrible massacre. So that's a significant wake-up call. And as far as I'm concerned, you look at them on the street, Stephen, and you see themselves what I call the long COVID anarchists, right? They cover their faces. They're like Egyptian mummies running down the street. And I always tell myself and tell them to their faces, why are you covering your face? Don't be shy of your ideology unless you know how ugly it is. I want to know who you are. Your neighbor wants to know who you are. Your employer wants to know who you are. The FBI should know who you are. So be proud. Why are you covering yourself with those keffiyehs and face masks unless you know what you stand for? And just like these people know what they stand for, your ordinary American and every peace-loving person and every justice-aspiring individual watching those people knows exactly what they stand for. And now is the time, and I always stress that before every community I meet, the time for words is over, the time for deeds is now. Now is the time to ask, to demand the right, the peace, the majority, the peace-loving people to stand up to that evil, to take a step and make their voices heard. Because if we do not, then we're just allowing these chariots of evil fire to pass through and destroy all that we care about. And that fire is going to come knocking on our door. And I think that more and more people understand that urgency. And the same message I might have carried a year or 2 years or 10 years ago would have been received one way, like I'm inciting for some sort of a interaction. Today, there is a greater understanding that if we don't stand up to that evil, we will all wake up to pay the price, in spite of the fact, like you called it out, Stephen, this is the loud minority, not the majority of the people that we see out there.
And it's worth invoking our dear mutual friend, Ido Aharoni, because he says that there's the 10, 20, 70%. The 10% are those that we've lost. They're those crazies that are out there on the streets calling for from the river to the sea. We're never going to reach them. There's the 20% like you and me and the many allies that we have And then there's the 70% of those people that don't really understand the situation, that don't really have an opinion, that are maybe somewhat supportive of Israel, but don't really know why. And it's those people, that 70%, that we really need to reach out to.
It's very true because, Ido is a great friend and mentor. And one of the things, as a practical tool that I've taken from him and I urge other communities to uphold and I try to do myself is always ask yourself, who is your audience? When
Mhm.
you engage on the outside world, who is your audience? Because if you engage with the loonies, with the anarchists, those who are in your face chanting those abhorrent chants, you're not going to convince them. None of them is going to sing Hava Nagila with you. None of them is going to sing Hatikva or worship Golda Meir. They're a lost cause, so don't squander your energy there. But there are a lot of bystanders who are looking at your interaction with them. And these are the 70%. This is the ground, the fertile ground that needs to be engaged with, where you can actually achieve results long term for the Jewish community in building allyship and for the state of Israel.
Let's put a pin in that because I want to ask you a question about that. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me then like the genie is out of the bottle now, but we have the capability and the capacity to put that genie back in the bottle by reaching out to that 70%.
Let me take on that genie. I claim that that genie has always been out of the bottle. The problem was that that genie shrouded itself. It hid behind trees, behind political argumentations, behind all sorts of media reportings. The genie never exposed itself the way they do now. Think about this for a minute. When they bring down, I always go back to that crossing of the Delaware moment for me in the course of the last year, and that's the image from UNC Chapel Hill when the American flag is taken down and a Palestinian flag is hoisted. What does that mean? What is a Palestinian flag? What does it stand for aside from anarchy and destruction? And then you have those group of frat boys who take the American flag, they hoist it on the pole, and they protect it while being pelted by the pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, anti-US elements. That's a very telling moment of how the silent majority is rising to the occasion. We are now waking up to see that reality. And that's very important because that genie is much more difficult to contend with when it's hiding itself and shrouding itself in different capes. But right now, when I look it in the eye and I understand what it stands for, then I know how to handle it. And by the way, that's also a reflection, and we can touch upon this later, of the geopolitical arena right now in the Middle East.
Which we will touch on. Going back to the 10%, though, there are people that I know and people that I have considered friends that I have spoken to about Israel that have their own platforms on social media as well as their own podcasts, so on, that have had Israel-focused guests, people that are supportive of Israel that have been on their shows. And there's one person in particular that I'm thinking about, and I don't want to mention his name. And over the last couple of months, I have seen the vitriolic posts that he has shared on social media so antagonistic towards Israel and so one-sided and so lopsided that I don't even know how to deal with him. I don't even know how to approach him. And that scares me because he has a very, very strong following. And dare I say, I think many in his following are probably part of that 70%.
Sure.
So how do you deal with those types of people versus sort of, the purple-haired girl is Daniel Ryan Spalding likes to talk about, that's wearing the keffiyeh and has the nose ring, et cetera, that's calling from the river to the sea. How do you deal with not them, but how do you deal with these people that actually do have followings?
Well, I'll tell you, to be honest, I'll ask myself two major questions. First of all, there is the understanding that social media is indeed skewed against Israel. We understand that. We know the algorithms. We know who's behind TikTok. We know the powers that be. We understand the challenges that we're facing on social media. I urge people to understand that social media is not a reflection of our society to that degree. It does not represent the majority of the voices that we see out there. I think we're seeing this, as you mentioned before, in the public opinion polls when people are asked about Israel. We know what social media represents. We also see it in the political sphere as well. So we understand the gap that exists between the social media arena and what's happening out there in the world. On a third level, I'll tell you that we need to ask ourselves about each and every one of those individuals. What is their motive? do they really believe in those claims, or are they doing this to engage more and to achieve more following because they know that if they utter those nonsense, then they may be more appealing to the ignorant masses on social media, to the algorithm that will enhance their presence, that will give them more following? So that's a question that we must ask, because that touches upon the energy that we should invest in that engagement on a wider scale. And in general, I'll tell you that what I found to be most efficient in engaging with those haters is not necessarily, as Jews, we always jump into the Talmudic approach, right? Let me give you an example. I have to teach you the facts. Let's go to San Remo. Let's go to the blue line, the green line, the red line. We dive into all of these facts that we relish in. We play in it like it's a huge playground. But the truth is that ignorance rules the dome. People have no, or majority of the people, or most people, or at least we have to ask ourselves about those we engage with, how much do people really know about what we're talking about? And in doing so, I love posing questions, right? Questions like, okay, I understand your claim. What would you do? Here is Israel. Hamas is hiding behind innocent civilians, literally wrapping themselves up in babies while firing rockets into Israel, knowing that that rocket may fall in a kindergarten in Israel. What do? Do you fire? You don't fire? You won't believe the level of, literally a deer in the headlights. Suddenly, when they're being posed with this question, when they're being asked all of these elements, they're like, I think and in that point, that you hit a nerve, and you're able to take that step forward, and you don't necessarily get those people to think, but everybody else who's listening in, whether it's on social media when you post a comment, or whether it's in an actual event where somebody come up to me and make those accusations. But so many people are dying now in Gaza. So many people are being killed at the moment. I understand what you're saying, and death is a horrible thing. It's a terrible thing that Hamas brought upon Palestinians. But what do you recommend Israel does? And sometimes, literally, I would pull up a note and a pen and would say, give me the suggestion and I'll communicate it with the Israeli government. What do you think we should do if a terrorist wraps themselves in dozens of women and children? Like IDF soldiers have shared with me, when they were fighting in Gaza, they saw those cowards dressed in civilian outfit actually coming at them with about a group of 100 women and children marching. Literally, Stephen, they were marching ahead of them and they were firing from behind. And those soldiers have been able to take out those cowards without harming a hair on the head of any of the children and women. That's the power of Israel right there.
See, that's the message that needs to get across to people. I will say, though, Shahar, I think you've been very lucky in terms of your interactions with those people, because when I have approached those people, it seems that everybody has an opinion. You know what they say, what's are like opinions. Everyone's got one. Okay. I can't say the word of what I'm thinking of right now. Otherwise we'll get kicked off of podcast land. But the point is that everyone's got an opinion. And no matter what you say, I have found that everyone just draws their line in the sand, and nobody wants to admit, like, wow, maybe you have a point. Whether it's about Israel or anything else,
never admit it.
They'll never admit it.
But,
and so that's the
Stephen,
thing.
You're speaking to the listeners. You're speaking to the followers, those who saw that post and can look at your comment and get those 70% to think, because these are the people that I'm tapping into. I'm never going to change students for justice in Palestine. I'm never going to change those elements. They're never going to listen to me. But when I pose those questions to them, I get other followers to think about that reality. And that's what I'm trying. That's the result I'm trying to get at. I don't want us as individuals or as a community to waste our invaluable and very rare resources. Remember, we're outnumbered, even on social media and beyond. Like, how many Jews do you actually have? And the fact is that we're fighting for our very existence against a hostile world. I mean, look at what's happening online. Forget about Israel, on blatant anti-Semitism. The kind of argumentations that are being made out there that, Zionists are, the offspring of demons. I mean, seriously, this is actually taking place. You have major geopolitical experts. Actors have been actors like John Cusack, Professor Hot Tub Time Machine, who comes and talks to you about the reality in Gaza like they know anything about this. I mean, it's absolutely shocking and shameful. And that's part of the horrible reality that we have to cope with.
So in the
I'm sorry if I offended any fan of Hot Tub Time Machine.
I don't even know what that is, so you certainly didn't offend me.
You have missed on nothing.
Okay. Listen, there's so much out there. I can't. Well, I want to ask you something before I move on. Just based on what you just said, how do you, in the course of a day, stay sane? Where do you get your information from? How do you distill that information? I feel that, I do this podcast and I do my regular The One Way Ticket Show podcast now in its 12th season, may I add. And I have
Beautiful. By
so
the way,
much.
one of the best shows if you only want to take even a vacation for an hour or so out of reality and just engage with the outside world. That's been such a great experience for me, Stephen, because I need it. When we deal and delve
Yeah.
in this world all the time, I need that vacation spots that you're able to take me on, and it's a great service that you provide for all of us. Thank you for
Thank you
that.
very much, and I appreciate it. The point that I'm making is that I have so much to do and so much research with both of these shows. And then there's the American political scene that I want to stay on top of. And then there's, of course, just regular Israel news. But then we have the news of the war. And then we have news of anti-Semitism. And it's just layer on layer on layer. I find that we're needing to approach. And I'm just wondering, as someone that is really, really in the thick of it and goes out and speaks across the country, how do you stay sane? And where do you get your news from? And what's your suggestion in terms of distilling all of this information?
First of all, a version of this question sometimes I get asked by people who tell me, Shahar, you delve in the dark arts so often, engaging with the haters. How do you remain smiley and optimistic? Like, what drives you in the face of all of that evil and
Mhm.
ignorance? And the truth is that there is a painting behind me that depicts the destruction of the Second Temple. That pivotal moment in the history of the Jewish people when that wonder of the ancient world, the Jewish temple, the Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel was lost. And there is definitely a sense of history in what we do now, Stephen. The understanding that in spite of all of the difficulties, get this, we are the fortunate ones to live at the time when we have a state of Israel. Our forefathers dreamt of living in such a reality, but they always yearned to return to Jerusalem. Now we are in Jerusalem and beyond. We have an incredible country. We have an unbelievable economy. Israel is one of the positive members in the family of nations, providing literal light unto the lives of billions of people using agricultural and technology, healthcare, and education. I've seen that firsthand as an Israeli diplomat. I am immensely proud of the state of Israel and immensely thankful for the fact that I am alive at this time to be able to stand up for the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And that reinvigorates me every moment of every day to know that that is the great gift that I received as an Israeli and a Jew living during these difficult yet wonderful times. Because in spite of the fact that we may view this as one of the tough times or worst times in our history, and this is
Mhm.
indeed a tough and troubling time, this is also an incredible time to really recognize and observe the miracle, to understand that those haters, in spite of that animosity, in spite of that anti-Semitism, have not been able to achieve their goal. We have not lost neither our space in history nor the respect we have from various corners around the world. And I think that for me, one of the major sunshine, the rays of light that I've been witnessing is the incredible Israel Defense Forces, soldiers and officers, men, women who are on the ground. When you listen to them, Stephen, when you hear what they say when they're in Gaza and outside of Gaza, when you see the level of their social involvement, you understand the kind of incredible leadership and younger generation that Israel has. To many people and to many of us, I think it's an experience when we say, oh, the younger generation is so, when we were so. And suddenly this, TikTok generation, those screenagers, the officers, IDF officer, that Ethiopian guy who ran for 8 miles when he heard about what ran by foot for 8 miles when he heard about October 7th to fight against those evil savages entering Israel. I mean, this is Israel. So how can I look at this reality and not smile and not be energized and not be optimistic when all of our enemies are being defeated, when Israel, as a tiny yet mighty nation, stands tall across the board in the face of so many other nations, when Israel brought more medals in the last Olympics than the entire Arab world together? How can we not be invigorated and optimistic about that. I ask you, Stephen.
Well, what I think about often when I'm feeling all of this weight of all of the news and everything else, what I do to stay optimistic and hopeful for the future is I say to myself, we've been at this for about 4,000 years. We're going to be fine.
Right.
It's the rest of the world that we should be concerned about.
Very true. And you asked me about sources of information.
Yeah,
For us, we swim in this, we drown in this. We consume it, and I try to take news from different perspectives, both within Israel and outside of Israel, and make the judgment myself based on education. I think the foundational element here is educate yourself on the facts, and there are multiple
yeah,
resources from various organizations that can provide you what we call facts. Reality as it is. And then using that education and those facts to analyze social media posts, relevant stories that you're reading, because everybody has a perspective and subjectivity to especially a topic like Israel. But there is also another element here, Stephen, is it understanding that most people are not like you and I. They're not like so many people in our community. They truly have no idea. Some people don't know what Israelis look like. Some people think that Israelis have to be of a certain, like, ultra-Orthodox Jews are Israelis,
yeah.
or Israelis are only Ashkenazi Jews or American Jews. Some people would look at me, a Yemenite origin Jew who's brown-skinned, and will say, "Oh, you're Jewish? I had no idea." Sometimes I'll get that response in a synagogue. I remember one of the formative experiences of my life was when I was young, many, many eons ago, before the earth came into being and dinosaurs roamed the earth.
You're not
And I
that old,
was
Shahar.
I was in London, and I remember I felt like, I just want to pop in on a Friday night and go for services at one of the shuls. I made no announcement. The community didn't know me. I was, freshly arrived at the embassy, and I just came to the synagogue, thinking I'm in Israel, right? It's a synagogue. I'll be able to come in, no problem. And I remember it. They would, "Are you? So who are you? And what is that?" And I remember thinking to myself, that's so weird. And that was my first exposure to the diaspora experience of being safe and taking care of yourself and really, filtering the people who come in. And that told me a lot. And that, those experiences have shaped my life in so many ways.
Beautiful. Well, speaking of Jewish unity, this would be a good time, Shahar, for us to talk about the Global Conference for Israel. As I hinted at the top of the show, we want everyone in earshot to go to jnf.org and search for info. Right there, there's a link to the Global Conference for Israel. It's taking place in Dallas, Texas. I've never been to Dallas except through the airport, so I'm very excited about that. From November. Have you been to Dallas, by the way?
I have, but I've done a little more than just the airport, but still, speaking to somebody like you, what does it mean being in a place? When we travel
Yeah.
through a place, we go in, we tend to have engagements, maybe a meeting and speak, but I always have this desire, Stephen, to experience the place,
Yes.
to explore it, to speak with people, to engage. I mean, the world is so vast. I wish we could explore all of it. I'm sure it's a sentiment that you resonate with.
I'm going to go off on a tangent, which people that really know me know that I go off on tangents, but I'm going to get back to the Global Conference for Israel.
Right.
So on my other show, the One Way Ticket Show, I interviewed Joe Diaz, who is one of the co-founders of Afar Media. And we were talking about people that are they want to visit every country. They're country tickers, right? Like, oh, I
Right.
visit 95, 96. He said, it's not the number of countries you've been to, it's the number of kitchen tables that you've sat at in those countries.
Right.
And there's a huge, huge difference.
Huge
So I'm with you on that. So we hope that everybody gets to sit around a kitchen table in Dallas, Texas, November 14th to the 17th. And even if they don't go to someone's home, there's going to be a wonderful big Jewish JNF table, if you will, right? Every day from the 14th to the 17th, a global conference for Israel. JNF does this every single year. It's a conference filled with solidarity, inspiration, tactical and practical solutions to stand up against Jew hatred, which is what Shahar and I have been talking about. And it's really a platform where you can learn how to be a voice for Israel. And Shahar, you have been at previous ones. That's where we met last year for the first time. We should share with
Right.
our dear listeners, we've known each other for a number of years now, but
Right.
we physically never met until last year's conference in
That's
Denver,
what I
which is
love
the
about Jewish
craziest
Jewish
thing.
geographies, online and
Yes,
offline. We're always family. It doesn't matter.
exactly.
When we met, physically, it was like hello. We've always known each
I
other.
feel
And
like I've known you all my life, right?
same, and I
And
love that feeling. I
I do as
relish it.
well.
And that's what I felt, at the JNF conference when I attended last year. There was such great energy in the air, and meeting people from all across the country, coming together, getting to
Yes.
know each other. And then it ended up, I ended up visiting so many of those communities, engaging with so many of these people. And I felt like that diplomatic bee again, connecting the literal dots from the different corners, the level of intensity and interest, the level of passion. And you know what? Let me give you a small, tiny word that sometimes is not used in Jewish spaces. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it, right? We
I did
don't
too.
usually use those words like enjoy and fun, and it wasn't just about the interesting sessions. It's also about the in-betweens and having a meal and breaking bread together and chatting and listening to experiences. I love listening. It's one of my passions to learn. I love people. I love learning about experiences of people, and especially in our world. And I remember we had, the bad guy standing on the other side of the fence, and I could see how much our people just stood strong and didn't care. And it was like in your face, here we are as proud and strong Jews. And I loved that feeling. It filled me with great energies to carry on. So I highly recommend that experience, for anybody who's able to attend. You're going to enjoy every second of it, and you should enjoy. And there is nothing wrong with enjoying that stuff of Israel in spite of all of the difficulties.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. And we should share with our listeners that some of the speakers will include Colonel Richard Kemp, whom we've had here on the program. And I am so excited to hear him speak in at the conference live. Also, speaking of fun and funny, comedian and actor Michael Rappaport's going to be there. And I have a front row center seat for him. Just saying, no one take my seat. Also, broadcaster and activist Emily Austin is going to be there, and she's phenomenal. And then also Elizabeth Rand, who's the founder of MACA, that's Mothers Against Campus Anti-Semitism, will be speaking. Rabbi David Wolpe will be there, who is also just absolutely sensational, and so many others. And so we invite everybody in earshot to go to jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org for the Jewish National Fund Global Conference for Israel, November 14th to the 17th in Dallas. And going back to what Joe Diaz from Afar Media said about a kitchen table, let me just say that from the 14th to the 17th, this is going to be one big kitchen table that we are all going to be sitting around, breaking bread, sharing ideas, and really just getting to know everybody as really fellow members of a group that is supportive of Israel and the Jewish people. So there you go. And in relation to that, I want to ask you then, Shahar, about the importance of allies, the importance that we need to have allies in Israel and really throughout the world, and your ideas, your perspective on fostering those allies.
So, that's a great topic, Stephen, because, I always find many of in our communal world leaders and others come up in such instances when there is an emergency situation or a crisis and say, where is everyone? So there are two layers to that thing. First of all, we spoke about the masks off era. The fact that post October 7th, it really gave us an opportunity to see who our real friends are. We live in a world where a lot of the organizations are fostering relations, are building bridges, are doing activities together with other leaders of other communities. But you really want to ask yourself, who stood by your side when you needed it? When you fostered relations for years, who was actually there? And you've seen that with many of the progressive and ultra progressive Jews and Jewish leaders and communities who, went out there to support different liberal and progressive causes over the years. But when October 7th happened, finally, they found themselves on the opposite side of the fence. And that's an atrocious thing to say, because who can be on the opposite side of brutal rape, pillaging, massacre, and murder? But that was the reality. So there has been an element of awakening there. But also the key for me is we should not think about allies only in times of emergency. We should think about allies all the time. Because even in a relationship, when we have, it's not just about what you can do for me. It's about what I can do for you. Where have I and when have I been? And I'm not talking just about the organizational high-end level of, those collaborations. It could be just you and I. It could be a student leader on campus. It could be, business leaders. It could be other people. And just engaging with people across the board and helping them and being there for them when they're of any kind of need is absolutely crucial long term. And I hope that in the course of this crisis, we'll be able to think about that strategy and implement it when Israel wins, when the war is over, when the hostages go back home, and when Hamas is utterly defeated and Israel moves to a continuous, prosperous future. even then we ask ourselves, what can we do to engage with other people? And it doesn't have to be only on the geopolitics. Going back to Ido, it's always been one of his major themes to understand that Israel is more than just a one-issue topic. Israel touches upon so many issues, so many different fields that are relevant to our lives, that we can choose what level of engagement and what sphere of engagement we want to have. It could be history, it could be archaeology, it could be culture, it could be food and technology, it could be, the outside world and how to engage with the challenges that the world we are facing in the world. So we're so lucky to have so many different platforms of engagement for Israel, that we should utilize them not just in times of emergency. And sometimes we'll be disappointed with the kind of friends we make, and so many times we will find unbelievable allies and people who will, be connected. But what's been so telling for me, and such an important part of who I am as a person, is the understanding that it's not just about the message, but very much about the messenger. You can be the message. You are that message. If you are kind, if you are smiley, if you are supportive, if you are there for other people, many of them will be there for you when the time comes. And that is the key principle in building those long-term relationships. And this emergency, this crisis, is a great reminder of how important it is to foster those relationships long term, not just for the emergency, and also be there for those other people.
As my 94-year-old Holocaust surviving rabbi says, and always invokes, every conflict comes to an end. And indeed, this conflict is going to come to an end.
Yep.
It's just how we get through it. Indeed, I just wanted to share that based on what you just said. You also just invoked students, and we should share with our listeners that in the time-space continuum of podcasting, we're actually recording this on August 20th, 2024, and the release date for this episode is Wednesday, September 25th. So the world can do 12,000 somersaults from now until then, indeed. And also
And guess what? It's not going to change. Anti-Semitism is not going to change.
Yeah,
The
it's going to
bad
be
guys are not going to change. And our eternal optimism is not going to change.
exactly. Amen to that. Yet we don't know. I mean, we can guess what's going to happen on college campuses, right? But we don't know, are there going to be other presidents, for example, that are going to be resigning over the next few weeks? What exactly will happen? So I just wanted to establish that in terms of the date that we're recording this, and then we're going to broadcast it. But my message
But
to you is,
Stephen, pertaining to that point, you
yeah,
mentioned it before, and I just want to highlight it. In so many ways, the crisis that we've seen in American academia, yes, it touches upon Israel, but it's very much an American internal problem. Foreign
yeah.
involvement, the shaping of the minds of the younger American generation by the hands of evil regimes like the Islamic Republic in Iran, China, or Qatar is a huge issue for concern for every American parent, undermining American values, defacing American monuments, treating US like it's the enemy, torching US flags on college campuses goes far beyond Israel. So a canary in the mine? Yes, this has been a humongous wake-up call across the board, and I hope everybody listens.
And thank you for sharing that. And those parents that are sending their kids to these quote unquote elite universities need to be questioning the universities. Excuse me, where are your endowments coming from?
Right.
And what sort of influence do those endowments have in the course of educating my child? So those are questions that need to be asked.
And you're talking about timeliness. There was a story just published yesterday in the media about elite Jewish high schools in the city of New York, and none of the kids going to Columbia University because of what we've seen at Columbia, which is a breach of all codes, of all norms from faculty and staff, beyond just the student anarchists and rioters. So that's a huge major issue of concern. And I always think about Columbia, that former Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, historian and former member of Knesset, always used to call it Bir Zet on the Hudson, like Bir Zet being one of the Palestinian universities that has been a producer of terrorists in Judea and Samaria. So that's an interesting perspective. I'm just hoping for a better future for the United States of America as well.
Indeed, we all are. My question to you is, what message do you have to students then this coming academic year?
Very simple. And the most important message that we can send right here, Stephen, from this incredible podcast and to everybody out there: you are not alone. It may be difficult for you to go through that class, to listen to that professor, but remember, there is a tremendous community that stands behind you. So find the time now before you go back to school or as you go back to school to liaise, to be a part of that incredible power grid of goodness, power grid of Zionism, the Jewish community and the Israel supporting community. There are many across the nation who stand with you. So if something happens, you'll know where to reach. Just remember that you must not keep quiet, that nobody will trample all over your identity without ramifications, because we are in an age of accountability. We have seen Jewish donors take away their money from leading campuses across the US. We have seen accountability from alums. We have seen the federal government taking issue with presidents of universities. We have seen DEI under immense scrutiny across the board. Remember, there are many organizations, many good people out there who will stand by you. So find those friends, find those allies. Don't wait until it's late into the crisis. Know where you are and be strong with your identity. Don't relinquish, don't give it up, because that has been what kept our people up and about and alive for thousands of years and will keep us going for thousands more. So just remember, you are not alone.
And you and I are both active in Club Z, and it's worth bringing that wonderful organization up because it's really about arming teens with information and with pride about being Jewish, as well as in support of the state of Israel. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, this notion that it's not about, educating kids when they get to college. We have to begin before they get to college.
Absolutely true. So education starts at home. It's about what you do at home and the kind of feelings that you exude and the conversations that you have. It's also the kind of resources that you avail for your children outside of your home. It's very much about the education, Stephen. But here is the unique thing that I've often mentioned at my JNF meetings and beyond. It's about the facts, but it's also about the faith, the backbone, the belief, the idea that you are standing up for something that's right, that's just, that's proper, that in spite of the fact that you might not know the immediate detailed information about each and every incident that takes place, and God knows and everybody knows, and most of all Israelis know that Israel is not perfect and there are many challenges, and we are willing to acknowledge them and move on and make ourselves better because it's an ongoing project. But there is a deep sense of faith that Israel is just, that Israel is on the right side of history, that even though we may make mistakes along the way, deep inside we are benevolent, fighting against dark, evil forces that desire destruction. We are fighting death cults when our enemies look at us and say, we love life while they adore death. And that's a clear definition between the light and the dark. So Club Z has been able to provide not just education for those teens, but really make them, empower them on an individual level to have a voice of their own, to be able to stand up for what they believe in, to know that they're not alone, and actively reach out to their peers on campus, at their school, and across the country to engage with what they're looking at. And that's an incredible point. What parent doesn't want their kids to be a strong young adult, being able to express their views? That goes even far beyond Israel, Zionism, or being Jewish. It's about being active citizen, an active civilian in our society today. And that's an unbelievable asset that I have found very appealing with Club Z, because I've seen the kind of engagements that those teens have been going on. I attended also their national conference last year. I've seen kids, those teens, wearing bow ties to the conference, engaging with the Princeton Review of Books, launching assemblies at their high schools, talking about the issues, like not shying away from the fight. And one of them actually has an incredible quote. And he said, one of those teens said, and it stayed with me, that in the course of all of this, we didn't just find a fight in our school because we found ourselves. There is a deep sense of identity, which I think is something that I know is very important for me to give to my children, and very important for parents to give to their children.
Right. And we should encourage all of our listeners in earshot to go to clubz.org. Once again, clubz.org to learn more. Just one or two other bases, because I know that you're crazy busy, and I know that you've got more people to inspire throughout the day, Shahar.
It's such a joy to be with you, Stephen. You've
You
no
as well.
idea.
It's always, listen,
Providing me great respite from the fight, just to engage with family. It's like you and I get together, and sometimes we have this feeling when it's, over a conversation or Zoom or, just long distance. There is nothing long distance about you and me now. Like I feel close
Exactly.
to you as if I sat with you in the kitchen and we just had a cup of coffee, tea, or whiskey and chat about the ages. So I love that feeling, and thank you for being able to provide such a feeling, even though we are on Zoom.
Listen, right back at you. Well, listen, just really just two more bases, and then I think we're going to wrap. Correct me
No,
if,
already? You promised
yeah,
we're going to have enough time.
listen, it's almost an hour. I'm a man of my word. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, Shahar, but it seems that there's always been a bit of a gulf between Israeli and American Jews. And I'm feeling like that gulf has been bridged over this last year. And I'm wondering if you can really address that, because I've heard from Israelis saying, we're really concerned for you
Yeah,
in the diaspora,
right.
right?
So
As whereas
it's
before it was the other way around.
and in many ways, you're right. There was a major concern before
Mhm,
October 7th. There was a feeling like we are, splitting ways. And I've been, that person whose life is that bridge, right? I
mhm.
see myself, speaking up for Israel in our communities, both Jewish and non-Jewish spheres, right here, in the US and beyond. And back home in Israel, I do the same. I go and speak in army bases and high school students and beyond, talking about American Jewry and diaspora Jewry and leadership and the sentiment that exists here. So I love, that's my life's passion, to be on that bridge. And I was very concerned, sadly, tragically, horribly. Post October 7th, there has been a major awakening where there was an understanding that they're out to get us, not because of the apartheid or because of any political argumentation, but because of our very being Jewish. And that sentiment, trickled right into the very foundation of the Israeli soul and touches the core of the American and diaspora Jewish soul as well. There was that understanding that we are one big family, in spite of the fact that we may have difference of opinions on a political level. That strengthened the sense of unity. And we go back to exactly what we started with, right? That girl on that plane, that togetherness, that knowing, oh, you're Jewish, that understanding that she didn't know if I'm a, Democrat, Republican, pro Netanyahu, anti Netanyahu, loves matzah, hates Pesach, loves Purim. It was all about our being. And I think that being strengthened significantly. And it is our challenge to continue building on that sense that was born out of this horrible, horrible massacre and tragedy, and build it and project it and leverage it into an optimistic, prosperous future, not just economically, but as a community feeding off and on one another and supporting one another. We always love, as diplomats, as Israeli diplomats love to say sometimes, Israel is like the insurance policy of the Jewish people, but the Jewish people is the insurance policy of the state of Israel. We are together, we are one and the same, and we shall continue to be so and come into a new era, both within Israel and in the Jewish community, a new era of prosperity and unity. And yes, I am that Jew who is optimistic.
I love that. Well, listen, now really as we wind down our conversation, Shahar, you're a father. One day, God willing, you'll be a grandfather, great grandfather. What would you like future generations in your family, other families, to know about our time today?
I really feel, and that's what I try to instill with my children, that the sense of history, the understanding, the realization of the time that we live in and how fortunate we are in spite of everything, and not taking any of it for granted. Sometimes I think about students in, San Francisco, back in the days when San Francisco was proper, and you're sitting in the California sun and you're enjoying, the outside environment, and you think to yourself, oh, we can talk about Israel as if it's always, and forever been there, but it's not. Israel is a rare gift that was given to us. I was celebrating my younger son's bar mitzvah, and a part of his desire was to go and, visit the world, similar to Amazing Stephen, like father, like son. We all engage in this globe trotting, and he wanted to go to Italy. And one of the uplifting experiences that we've had was visiting the gallery in Venice, where we saw that incredible image that's behind me, the destruction of the temple. And it was, on this huge wall where you can dive into the details. And we sat there for an hour, just observing, just absorbing, just understanding who we are, getting a sense of our identity. And that's so important for me to instill in my kids and in the future generations, because without that sense of identity, they will lose directions themselves as they try to navigate the stormy waters of life. And I've been very fortunate to have my kids, really embrace that sense, and seeing so many others do the same. And I think that I want them to look at us, Stephen, and say, we know where you're coming from, and we are a continuation of that chain. I'm a continuation of my grandparents who sat with me as a child and told me, the great appreciation they had for living in Israel, coming from Yemen and being able to be alive in Israel, even if it's shabby conditions, even if they had to cope with many challenges as newly arrived immigrants to Israel from an underdeveloped country like Yemen that's been, now taken down the toilet by the Iranian proxies and the evil regime in Tehran. But you just need to understand how fortunate we all are to be who we are and to live at this time. Can you imagine, had they not made the journey to Israel, and I would have been born in Yemen, doing what? Living as a Jew in Yemen? What kind of a future would I have had if I'd even been born, or being able to survive beyond youth with a level of animosity? So it's always that appreciation for the simple that I want to give future generations to understand and to take with them moving forward.
And on that inspirational note, we're going to leave it right there. Shahar Azani, it is always a pleasure to learn from you. And I want to thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of IsraelCast, and look forward to our round 4 the next time you're on.
Amen. And I just want to lodge an official complaint, Stephen. This can't be so short. I feel like we just started, but thank you for making this so familiar. And it's been a pleasure to be with you and with all of our listeners and viewers out there.
Listen, I'm a talker and we could definitely go on and on. So I also have to cut myself off. Anyway, thanks so much for that. And we'll indeed have info about Shahar on the show notes page of our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. And of course, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. I have no idea why you would want to miss an episode. And just so indeed you never miss one, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. It's so easy. Simply search for IsraelCast. And don't forget to rate and review us 5 stars, of course, because that really helps with our rankings, which in turn make it easier for more folks around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. Now, it takes a whole moshav to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Stefan Oberman, JD Krebs, and Ellie Kodrin. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Mirrortone Studios right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top and tail, the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say howdy, I know Shahar would love to hear from you. Wouldn't you, Shahar?
I would absolutely love it, and I mean it.
All right. And I'd love to hear from you as well. So do email us, all of us, here at IsraelCast at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.